Yeah, good evening. So last session we discussed about uh, class components. How do you use them? So we learned about function component and class component, how to configure. So what are actually the differences? What are the differences between class component and function component? So we will see this point. So in regular interviews, this question comes: what is the difference between function component and class components, right? So what are the differences between function and class component? Actually, difference between function and class component, one point I will tell you here. Actually, class components technically basic, I will tell you, because already I told you that we don't prefer much of class components in latest. Right? So anyhow, first you need to know, because still several versions are using a class component. It represents a JavaScript class. Technically, it represents a JavaScript class, and it is good for extensibility. That means it is easy to extend. You know that classes can be easily extended. They support inheritance, polymorphism. You can easily extend the classes. It is good for extensibility. Another important about class is actually component class comprises of state. It comprises of state. What is the concept of state? What is the point about state is actually, I hope everybody who learned about web applications, you know one concept very detailedly. Yeah? When you learned about web applications, I hope you already know that http is a stateless protocol. Heard about this? Huh? HTTP is a stateless protocol. I hope every web developer knows this point. Huh? You are using HTTP as a protocol, and HTTP is a stateless protocol. That is very common thing. That's very general about web. What is the meaning of this? Why it is called as a stateless protocol? It is very important and very general for web application. Stateless protocol means what happens actually is, suppose we have the server. So we have the web server. Now what happens? We have a page, and we want to load this page into server. That means we load the page onto server. When page is loaded onto server, some memory is allocated for this page. The memory is allocated for the page, so that whatever values that page have to use, those values will be stored in that memory. Now you finished using this page, and you are accessing some another page 2. Now when you are navigating from page 1 to page 2, you are going from page 1 to page 2. Now what happens? The server navigates from page 1 to page 2, it will clean up the memory for page 1, deletes everything, and it will load the memory for page 2 newly. So what happened for in page 1 is never known to page 2, is never known to page 2. That means every page independent. So that means what happened in the previous page, the next page don't know. That means stateless nature is good. Stateless nature of HTTP is good. Why? Because after processing every page, it will clean up the memory. But it is not good if you are dealing with continuous operations. Continuous operations means, for example, suppose in page 1, user logged in, user ID, password. After login, then he finished login process. He got the inbox page. From that inbox, he wants to access some another page. When he moves from that page to another page, again it asks login. Why? Because you may ask, like, I already provided previous page login, but that is only for that page. Every page you have to log in, because whatever you done for that previous page, it is gone. You have to log in again and again. To avoid this, to handle this problem, web developers, what they do, they use a lot of state management techniques. State management techniques are required. State management techniques are compulsory in every web application. By using the state management techniques, you can maintain data across requests, so that you can carry the data to other pages. You can carry the data to some days later also. That means not only today, tomorrow they come, data is available. That is possible with the help of state management techniques. So HTTP is a stateless protocol. It works with the mechanism go, get, forget. That means connects, loads the memory for page, process the page. Once the page is finished, it will clean up the memory. Stateless nature is good because it is safe, it is secured, memory is well managed. But it is bad if you want continuous operations. Then every web technology in the world have to use state management techniques. Java, .NET, PHP, Python, everything. Web application means they have to have state management techniques. So many state management techniques are there. Like we have, I hope you know, application state, session state, cookies, right? So we have query strings. We can transport using query string also. So we can have hidden, we also use hidden states. Input type hidden will be there. So various state management techniques are required to handle the interactions with the page. What is good about class is it have a state predefined. That's very good. That means if it have a state predefined, then it is easy to store the data and maintain the data across requests. So that is the reason. So it is known as stateful component. We call it as stateful component. Stateful components means they have state. State is configured by default for class, so that we can easily use the state. You can easily configure the state. Not only that, another point here is the component class comprises of, means because it is a class. Because if it is a class, then what is the advantage about the class is, so class supports, you know, easy extensibility, which already I told you, extensibility, polymorphism, all these are supported. In addition to that, class components actually have the ability of, you have constructor, right? That means actually we call a constructor is not a key feature. We should not call it as a key feature. Actual point is, when you are using class components when compared to the function components, these class components are already stateful and they have a life cycle. That means a life cycle is configured for component. A life cycle is configured for component. What is the advantage of having the life cycle for component is, component life cycle allows the component to handle different features in different phases. That means at every phase, component can have various behaviors. That means from component begin to component end, it can maintain various phases. The advantage of these phases is we can easily identify where the issue occurred. So where the process failed, where the some output is not generated, where the problem occurred, we can easily track. The advantage of the life cycle components is tracking issues will be easy. It is easy to track the issues. Not only tracking issues, we can maintain a component to work so with different behaviors. The component can handle different phases. So that means it handles various phases from initialization. So to initialization to destroy. From initialization to destroy, it can handle various phases. For example, suppose I just give one example here. Suppose, so we are using some database. Suppose we have like some database. So we are using some database. We have some like database, and we are connecting with the database. So we have operations like some insert, like update, like delete, something like this we have. Now, generally, what happens is we have to perform these methods, insert, update, delete. But before doing this, we want the connection to happen, connect with database. After these operations, we want disconnect to happen. That means these need to automatically initialize before the component starts, after the component ends. That means you designed a component to communicate with the database. Before it loads and starts in the memory, it should establish connection with database. That means before you do insert, update, delete, it should first connect with the database. After you perform these operations, it should disconnect from the database. Then tell me, so where you will give this connection work, where you will define this connection. If connection have to happen at the time of creating a component, and that connection should end after the component is finished, then where to give this connection? In a class. Component is a class, na? Then this is the work of constructor. This is the work of constructor. That means what constructor can do? Actually, when you ask anybody what is the purpose of constructor, then general OOP learners will tell you that constructor is for initializing values, which is not. If constructor is for initializing values, then it should be called as initializer. Why it is called constructor? Am I right? If anybody asks like what is constructor, immediate answer will come, it is initializing values. Then it should be called initializer. Why it is called as a constructor then? So constructor is not about initializing values. Constructor is about creating of object. I hope you people know that if we can restrict the constructor, then we can restrict creating of objects. We can restrict extensibility of class. We can restrict extensibility of the class. We can restrict creating of objects if you can restrict the constructor. So constructor is used for handling these kind of interactions. That means at the time of loading the constructor into memory, you want to connect. After that, when it is unloading, it should disconnect. These kind of tasks can be maintained in a life cycle. So for example, you know already jQuery, JavaScript, Ajax. I hope when you learnt Ajax, you also learnt Ajax life cycle. Ajax life cycle means you have Ajax start. I hope you know Ajax end, right? Ajax stop. We have like Ajax success. We have like Ajax complete, Ajax complete. These are various life cycle phases of Ajax. Ajax error. These are all life cycle phases. When you have worked with Ajax in JavaScript, jQuery, I hope you know this. What is the purpose of this? What is the purpose of this? To track the status of the task that is being performed. This is life cycle. Close complete. This is life cycle. What is the purpose of life cycle? Is to track every phase. That means when you are using any Ajax request, there may be problem at any place. Now, if there is a life cycle managed for that, then we can easily track where the problem is. For example, you placed an order in a food delivery app. In a food delivery app, you placed an order and order delivery is delayed. Now you want to know the reason where it is delayed. Then you have a life cycle for that. I hope you know that. Life cycle is you placed the order and second step, after you placed the order, restaurant have to confirm the order. It may take time in confirming the order. That means delay is in confirming the order. After confirming, the restaurant is preparing the order. The delay may be in preparing the order. After preparing, a delivery partner need to be assigned. The delay may be in assigning a delivery partner. After assigning, still the delivery partner have to receive, go to the location. That may be taking time. After that, returning may be taking time. Where the problem occurred, you cannot simply say that it is delayed. It is delayed. You have to say that our delivery partner is taking time at the restaurant. Our order confirmation happened, but it is preparing order taking time. That means you have to cleanly track every issue. That is possible if you have a life cycle phases. Component life cycle phases helps the component to track each and every issue from start to end. That is very important to manage different tasks from start to end. And by default, a component class comprises of some life cycle methods. By using those life cycle methods, you can easily track the issues. That is one important advantage about the class component. These are the various phases of component. These are all available with class. These are all available with class. But what happened is, so this is class component. So function component. Function component, it represents a JavaScript function. JavaScript function. So it is not great in extensibility. Extending functions is always an issue. It is not great in extensibility. Right? That means without disturbing the function, you cannot extend the function. Without disturbing the class, you can extend the class. You can implement the class, you can extend the class easily. Extensibility is easy. Another important point, but important here is here. So it uses less memory. It uses less memory. It is faster. It is faster. It uses very less memory when compared to the class. Another very important is actually it is stateless. It is stateless. Up to React 17, only it is stateless. But very important is, so now that means you can say from React 17 and higher version, 17 and higher versions, you can use state. So you can use state. That means function component also have state. But we have to explicitly use state. We have to explicitly use state. Whereas class component implicitly have state. Internally it have state. Here we have to use explicitly state. Explicitly means manually we have to import a class and you can use the state. So you cannot call function as stateless component anymore, because function can also have state. But it is not implicit state, it is an explicit state. So that is the reason. So previously, if you ask a React developer, so who is already aware of older version, he will say that classes have state, functions don't have state. Then I have to go with the class components state. No, function also have state now. And very important, function also have. So that means no life cycle methods implicitly. But from 17 version explicitly you can configure. You can configure explicitly. Earlier you don't have implicit. So even now we don't have implicit. Explicitly we can configure. That means now you cannot even say that functions don't have a life cycle. Function also have a life cycle. But internally not supported. We have to explicitly use them. Explicitly configure them. Right? These are the important changes, actually, differences. So that means when compared to class, function is always better. But why we were avoiding functions earlier much? Because of these all issues. No state, no life cycle. So now we have state, we have life cycle. So then why to use a class? Only in the concept where we badly need extensions. Extensibility is the major thing. Then we will go with class. And remember, React application can have a combination of both. That means few components you can design class, few components you can design function. Now tell me which component you will design as class. So which component you will design as a class component? What you understood by these points? For which component you will design a class component? You will decide that, okay, now this class is good for this. What do you say? For which component? I'm asking for what kind of components? What kind of components? I already told you here the components that need regular extensions. Am I right? That means a component is not final. It changes regularly. That means a components keep changing. That means every time it is not same. Every time means every few days some new features will be coming. It will be changing. In that case, we will go with the class because we have to extend the component. That means we will not reconstruct the component. We will just extend. Some new features we will add. Every few days, some new features are coming. So in addition to existing, some new features are to be added. In that case, how you can extend? That you can do by using class components. Class components are good when you need a component that requires regular extensions. Suppose you need a component without any extensions. How it is we use in the same way for so much time. In that case, better we can go with function components. If you need regular extensions, then you can go with class, right? That is important. So technically, when to use a class component, when to use a function component, you decide according to the component's behavior and functionality, right? Only in the case of extensions, you better go with the class. Otherwise, nowhere we will use these class components in the modern generation, right? This is about how to define and work with the basic components. Remember, components, lot of things are there. One by one, we are learning. Components itself, we have to learn for so many days because components, one by one, we are exploring every feature about it, right? What you just learned up to now is how to create a component, whether to use a function or to use a class, how to render some markup using component. Only this you have learned. How to access a component in another component, how to make the component in the startup. These points you learned. Now the major in components is we have to learn very major points here is data binding. The first very important concept in React about components is after you know how to build a component, you have to first learn how data binding works. What is meant by data binding? So data binding is a technique that defines how data is binded to UI. Data binding is a technique that defines how data is binded to UI. So that means how to display the data, how we can present the data in the UI. That means actually better you say how data is binded to UI. UI is called as view. View is user interface. How data is binded to view. Actually, JavaScript jQuery use lot of DOM manipulations. That means JavaScript and jQuery uses lot of DOM methods for data binding. For data binding, they use lot of DOM methods, very complex. We have to use lot of DOM methods. DOM methods like get element by ID in order to access any element, like get query selector. So get query selector, right? Selector. So like we have append child like this. JavaScript have to depend on lot of DOM methods. So like create element, we have to create elements dynamically. Without that data binding cannot happen. If you have learned JavaScript, you know this, that data binding requires these things. In JavaScript, it have to depend on lot of DOM methods. DOM methods. And here, see, I will show you here now. Let's see this point actually. Suppose here we have the heading, and this is the body. This is the body. In the body, so we have an ordered list. Now here we have a script, and in the script we have a collection. Categories is a collection. It's an array. We have electronics, we have footwear, like this. Now when body loads, body on load, so when body loads, I want to add these all into this ordered list as a list item. How? That means generally we have a function body load. On body load, if I want to add these as list items into this is JavaScript, then we have to depend on lot of DOM methods. First, we have to read every item from categories. We have to read every item from categories. That means we are writing a iterator to read every item from the categories. For every item, we have to create a list item. Document.create element. We have to create a list item. After creating list item, in that list item, we have to display that item. After the list item is ready, we have to add that item to query selector, ordered list. To ordered list, we have to append that list item. That means we have to create a list item, assign data to list item, and add this list item to ordered list. This is what your JavaScript will do. That's what your JavaScript is going to do. This is very lengthy process, and this is very complex. Of course, there is no other way. This is how your JavaScript have to do. Now imagine if you have to create a table. You have to create a row. You have to create a cell. In the cell, you have to add data. Add this cell to row. Add row to body. That's very complex. This is the problem in data binding. This is data binding. We are binding the data to UI. Now, how JavaScript jQuery will do? By using DOM manipulation. jQuery is a little simple. jQuery is a little simpler than this, right? This is how JavaScript does. If you already know, very good. Otherwise, I will give you here. This is JavaScript, how it does. How jQuery does this? Suppose we have a script. Suppose we have a script and we have some, here we don't have jQuery installed. Actually, we need to download jQuery also. If jQuery is there, let's put jQuery CDN temporarily. I am using jQuery CDN here. Yeah. So this is jQuery CDN links. CDN latest. I'll do one thing. Let's refer. Yeah. But this is not required by general. I will just install npm install jQuery. Okay. I'm just downloading that here. Yeah. So I'm just using script source node. It is /node modules jQuery list jQuery JS. Yeah. If it is jQuery, then little bit different actually. If it is jQuery, then we don't need all these things. It will reduce your efforts a little bit. That means if it is jQuery, I'm using a jQuery function. I'm using each. I will read the categories. It uses a callback function. And here what we do. So this is jQuery actually. So we are using here jQuery. Currently it is empty. So we have to create a list item. We have to create a list item. Into the list item, we have to define each will use a key and a value. And here we have to print the value, and we have to append to ordered list. This is what jQuery does. That's how jQuery presents. This is little simple than you compared to JavaScript. But here also DOM methods are required. So we have to use append. We have to access by using the ID or references creating. So this is in jQuery, generally how you handle that in jQuery. So if it is jQuery, then this is how you do. Now how React will do, means how it can access this and how it can bind, how React can handle. What is advantage of React is React can handle data binding by using so binding expression and simple collection methods. Binding expression and simple collection methods. We don't need any DOM method here. So binding expression and simple collection. So we can handle data binding. We can handle data binding by using simple expressions. Let's see how we can do this. Means how we can bind the data, how we can access and how we can bind the data. Let's see how React can handle data binding. Data binding, so by using simple binding expression, I will show you that. Let's see. I will create a component here now. For every example, we will create one component and use that component. I will add a new component in the components folder. I will say data binding component.js. Okay. And here I am creating export default function, and the function is data binding component. So what it should return? It should return some container. Here I will keep here inside the function, because it is a function. Inside the function, we are having a variable. I will tell you without variables, states and all how to manage. We will see that. Initially, you can have a variable in a function. Already you know. You cannot have a variable in class. In class where we have to store properties. Here we can have a variable. Temporarily we will put a variable. And what variable contains? Suppose it contains product. Let's take simple data first. That means it is product. Okay, what is product? It is an object. What product object contains? It contains name. You know JavaScript object. So some name. It contains price. So some price. So it contains, it contains some stock. So some true or false. You can handle any type of data. Now the point is how to present this in the UI. That means here I need to present this in the UI. That means here I need to display, so product details, and I want to display this information here. Means we need to access and present it. How we can bind to the UI, the data. Later we will see how to bring this data from APIs and others. Currently we are hard coding some data. Let's keep this in the startup. I will go to index.js, and here I am importing that data binding component. That's it. Okay, let's run this. Start. So I am importing the data binding component, and here I need to display. So to display this data, here, actually I want data list. In that data term, here I said name. In the data definition, I want to display the name. Now, if you want to display the name, then simple, we have to use a binding expression, just a curly brace. This is data binding expression. This is data binding expression, just a curly brace. It is a data binding expression. Now here we have to access what is that product dot name. That's it. That means we are accessing the product name and displaying. Earlier in JavaScript, get element by ID and bind this data into that. Now we are just binding that to this location. Here so many points are there. Now see, another data term, price. Okay. Data definition. Here I need to use binding. So product dot price. Another data term is stock, and data definition. Data definition. Here we are defining product dot stock. It is true or false. I can use a simple expression here. I can put a parenthesis. If it is equal to true, then question mark. We can print here available. Otherwise, we can print as out of stock. You can write a simple expression. So data binding expression, it allows a simple expression here. This is a ternary operator, you know, right? We are using a simple data binding expression. So here, React data binding expression is the curly brace. It is the curly brace. Data binding expression is this. Now here so many points are there. I will tell you. That means this is one concept. So we are using the data binding expression and we are binding that information. You see here, everything is fine. Because it is using Bootstrap, let's keep the class here. We will use the class name as container fluid. Okay. Then it will keep little alignments proper for that. So that is container fluid is having some background actually. We modified that. So that means it is taking the CSS and applying here. So globally we are using some CSS. So I will change that because I customized Bootstrap class. Actually, it is a Bootstrap class I customized. So better I will put container. That's enough. Then it will be better, right? So technically, we can access the data and bind to UI. We can access the data and bind to the UI. JavaScript jQuery depends on a lot of DOM methods. Here we can simply use a binding expression. Here important point is actually you can bind to a property. You can bind to a property, or you can bind as literal. You can bind to property or you can bind as literal. Actually, if I write inside the div, so here, this is literal area. We call this literal. Anything is independent. So not belonging to an element, then it is literal. That means this doesn't belong to div. It is just inside div. That means is this text belongs to div? It doesn't belongs to div. It is just inside div. It is inside div. It is not a member of div. It is not a member of div. So these are called literals. That means, for example, if I remove this div, the tag and the end tag, this can be there directly without div also. It can be there directly without the div, but we can bind this to div. As a literal, you are doing it here. Am I right? As a literal, you are doing it here. For every element, you cannot do like that. For every element, you cannot do like that. So, for example, suppose if it is an image and you have to define a source, then you have to bind to the source. Am I right? This is binding to the property. Binding to the property. You are binding to the property. So you can bind to a property or you can bind as literal. Suppose if you see here, I am displaying here like this. Now product name is not binded to data definition. It is not binded to data definition. You can see here, it is not binded to data definition. Suppose I will remove from here. I want to bind to this data definition. Then how you can bind? Is data definition having any value? Is it having any value name? No. Data definition don't have any value properties, na? Right? They don't have that. So you have to define as a literal. But it have inner HTML, am I right? Inner HTML. Suppose inner HTML, I am binding like this. That means I am binding some value. What is that? So I am binding the product name. I am binding that product name like this. I am binding the product name to the inner HTML property. Right? But very important, you can see it's not there. Why? Because inner HTML is not a known property of this element. Understood? It is not a known property. It is a JavaScript property. Am I right? It is not HTML property. That means you can bind only to HTML properties, not JavaScript properties. That means it must be a HTML property. Otherwise, you have to use literal. You have to use literal. That means you cannot bind to any JavaScript properties, only HTML. HTML property only, not attributes. I will tell you. For example, see. You see, currently this is not there. You can bind here. Suppose, so this is product dot name. Suppose, see now, I am using another data definition. I will put input type is equal to text. This is text box. In the text box, if I want to display that value, then how? Now you cannot bind as literal. Then what you have to do? Text box have a property called value. Am I right? To the value property, we have to bind. What is it? Product dot name. Then it can access that and display inside text box. That means you can bind as literal or you can bind as property. So you can bind as literal or bind as property. So as property. That means you can have like product dot image something. Suppose if it is a text box, input type is equal to text. And you can bind here to value, right? We have value. And in the value, we are using some product dot name something. Roughly I'm configuring here, but this is how we bind. So binding to property or binding to literal. And many times we have seen, like in many websites, people who try to tell you about, teach you about React and all. Many times we have seen people telling you about React and the binding. We have personally seen in several websites that they will say that you can bind to attributes. That is wrong. You cannot bind anything to attributes. You cannot bind anything to attribute. You have to bind only to properties. You cannot bind anything to attribute, only to property. That means a HTML developer should know what are the properties, what are attributes available. And I hope you know that every attribute of HTML don't have a property. Every attribute of HTML don't have a property. Every attribute of HTML don't have same name property. Some names are changing, some properties don't available ever, not available at all. Right? So that means you see here, I will show you. This is one example I will put first. This component I will copy. Every day I don't need to give you how to keep it startup. You can do it, right? Just component example I am giving here. Now what we can do, the point is here, the key point here is, see, suppose I'm, see what is the my point. So you cannot bind any dynamic value to attribute. You cannot bind any dynamic value to attribute. You have to bind only to property. That means I hope you learned in HTML, right? In HTML, what you learned, suppose, so we have some input, type is equal to text, size is equal to 4, some required. What are all these attributes or properties? What are all these attributes or properties? In HTML, whatever you write are attributes only. HTML don't have properties. HTML don't have properties. HTML have only attributes. Only attributes. Properties are used by the languages and libraries to handle these elements. Suppose dynamically I want to set the size. Then what we do? We access size. That means size is available as two ways. Size is available as attribute as well as it is available as property. That is the reason. So you can use size as an attribute as well as a property, but not everyone. Suppose we have class. Class is available as attribute, but not as property. Not as property. If you want to use it dynamically, then we have to use class name. I told you, na? That means the attribute name is class. The property name is class name. Can you bind anything in React to a attribute? Not possible. It is only for properties. Only for properties you can bind. Only for properties you can bind. You cannot bind to attribute. Class is attribute. Class name is property. You have to bind to only properties. You have to bind to properties only. And some property names are different. Some property names are different. For example, you see, suppose I want to bind something to this text box. You see what I am doing? I am using class, and to the class I am using form control. Okay, form control is a class. I am applying this. According to Bootstrap, it is applied. That form control class is applied. But observe here, when I inspect and when I go to the console, in the console, you can see it says that, so invalid DOM property. It says invalid DOM property. It says that class is not a property. Its property name is class name. But it is working now. It is working for whom? For HTML it is working. For React it is not working. React have to change it. Then it cannot change with class. That means you have to use not class. You have to use class name. You have to use class name. This is important. You have to use the class name, not class. Now this is another option. You see, you provided value property. Value property, that is read only, that we will discuss later. It is saying that it is read only. Of course, we know that. We will discuss that point in the next concept. So initially, what is the point? you cannot bind any dynamic value to attribute. Always you have to bind to properties. Then you will face some problems because some attributes are not available as properties. Not even different name, they are not available at all. For example, see, I will show you another point. Observe. I will remove this here. Yeah. See, what I am doing here is I'm simply defining here a variable. This is suppose size. Size variable contains width. Width is some 450. That is the value, and height is suppose 100. That is the value. Now I am designing here a table. I am designing a table. In the table we have a row, in that we have a cell. In the table we have a cell, and here we kept as some welcome to React, something like this. We designed a table. I will show here property binding. So just example I will give here. You see now, this is welcome to React. For table, what I am doing here, for table I am giving as border as some one, like this we define. Table have border 1. Actually, for table we are giving border, it's fine. I want to adjust the width. Then see what I am giving. Width I am defining. Width we are accessing from size dot width. Okay. Dynamic. Its value is dynamic. So 450 is the width we are applying here. And you can see it is working fine. But I hope you learned in HTML and JavaScript that table don't have height. Table don't have height. Table have only width. No height property. That means height is available as attribute, but height is not available as property. Table height will work in HTML, but table height will not work dynamically in JavaScript, jQuery, or Angular, or React, anywhere, because table don't have a property called height. That means now here I am writing here height is equal to, I am accessing size dot height. So I am defining size height. Okay. So I just defined that height, size dot height. And you can see here height is working. But technically, when I go to the console, so when I look at the errors in the console, it says that you see, so this is the warning, it is defining. It says that so it cannot appear. This is okay. That means this is saying that it is unable to handle whatever the height you are configuring for this. Why it is not possible to bind to the height? Because height is not a property. Height is not a property. Then how do we apply height? We have to apply by using styles. You have to dynamically apply by using styles. So later I will tell you about style binding. We will see that through style binding you have to apply effects. That you can easily prove that point also. It is working. It is working for whom? HTML. HTML have that attribute, but React don't have height properties. So you can prove that. For example, see, so what I am doing here, I am showing you simple. I hope you know how to write JavaScript code. See what I am doing. I am creating a table, document dot create element. I am creating a table element, and I will create for where property in table. That means I am reading every property of table and showing you for your confirmation. Okay. I will print every property available for table. Okay. I am writing a program to read all the properties available for table. And when you run this, you can see that these are all the table properties. This is all the list of table properties. Hundreds of properties are there for table. You know only few of them, right? And you see now I am searching in the properties. I will search for width. width, you can see it is there. Width is available. I am searching for height. Height, it is not there. It is showing some offset height, scroll height, client height, but there is no height. Table don't have height as a property. In that case, how you will bind? For that, you have to use style binding technique that you are going to learn in the later stage. That means when you are binding, so data, when you are binding data, you should know that you cannot bind dynamic value to attribute. That means if you define like this, so div class is equal to, so some dynamic data you are binding, this is invalid. Generally, how you can bind div class name? We have to define like this. And another point, sometimes we have table height is equal to some dynamic value. This is invalid. Invalid, why? Because table do not have height. Table don't have height. Height as what? It is not having height as what? Property. It is having height as an attribute. In React, you cannot use attributes. You have to use only properties. So when you are binding any dynamic value, first you have to check yourself. Are you binding to the correct property or not? Do you know the name of that property or not? That's if you don't know the property names. I showed you the program. You can write a program and know the properties of every element, right? So you can get help from any repository, but you can write yourself a program to get all the properties of every element in HTML. Then you can understand that, okay, this is the name of the property I have to use. For example, you see, so the previous one we executed here, this is table related properties. In that I am searching for class. There is no class. This is the property name. What is the property name? Class name. Suppose I want to know this about image, then create element image, img. You don't need to change this. That is variable name, can be anything. I am just changing this. These are all image related properties. These are image related properties. Now, before applying any property, first you should know the properties available. So without that, you cannot directly bind the data. So don't bind the data. Don't bind the data to attributes. You have to bind the data to properties. That is one point. How we can handle data binding, right? I hope you are clear in this, right? How to access the data and how do we bind. This is simple data, fine. Then how to binding a collection. How we can bind a collection, how we can manage a collection. Let's see how we can bind the collection, how we can handle the collection. Just you saw in JavaScript and jQuery, I showed you example here. Let's do this now. Here what we are doing, we are creating var categories. Categories is an array. It is an array all. We have electronics, we have footwear, like this. It is an array. I want to present this here categories, and as an ordered list I want to present, right? I showed you in JavaScript how we presented. In JavaScript jQuery how we presented already I showed you. Now how React will do this? So as I already told you, React doesn't require DOM methods and all. So now tell me how to read all the values from this collection without using any explicit for loops and iterators. Without using any explicit for loops and iterators, how do you read all the values of a collection and return them? Without using for loops and iterators. So if you have learned about arrays in JavaScript, I hope you have learned that collection means what array na? I hope you learned in array you have the methods like map. Array have a method like filter. Array have a method like find. Array have a method like toString. Array have a method like join. These are all array methods. Array have a method like slice. By using these methods, you can access multiple values. Find will return only single value that matches the condition. To read the values from array, we have implicitly some methods. Map will return every element in array. It is an internal iterator. It will read every element from array. Filter will read every element from array and return if it is matching the given condition. Find will return only the first occurrence of the matching element. ToString will return all elements but separated with comma. Join also will return all elements with separated with your own delimiters, your own separator. And the slice will return the elements from specified index to other. So these are used. Why it is faster? Because it doesn't require external iterators or loops. You don't need any external iterators or loops. You can use these simple techniques. That means, for example, what you can do now here, see, this is simple point. Here I am creating an expression, curly brace. In this, we need to access these categories. So categories, I'm just using here categories. I'm using .toString. Okay, just I'm using toString, and you can observe that this toString, I'm using the toString categories. So that means actually it written all the categories separated with comma. It returns all the values separated with comma. I'm using here join. I'm using here join, and I can use a separator, and it will print all that with the help of separator. I can use filter, a callback function. I can use find, but this is not suitable for filter and find because it is plain string. Of course, we can filter only electronics, only footwear. We can do large amount of data. But what we need to do is read every element. And for every element, you need to generate a list item, right? Ordered list need to generate a list item. So we use an internal iterator called map. What map will do? It will use a callback function. That function will read every value from this. So whatever value it reads, I will collect in a category variable parameter. It is function parameter. And here we will return what it should return. It should return a list item. You know, this is an arrow technique, na? It is an arrow technique. Actually, how do we write here? Actually, how we write here? We write a function. Understood? Huh? In this function, we have to define a category, and what we have to do? We have to return, right? We have to return. What to return? We have to return a list item. In the list item, we have to present the category. That is, every category that you are reading, you have to access and present it. This is how we can handle that. It will display. This is completely school level JavaScript. This is right. If you see this kind of thing anybody is writing, that is school level JavaScript. Right now we don't expect this from our modern developers. Right? We just use simple category, right? It returns what it returns. It returns a list item. In that, it will display the category. It will display the category. Like this we define. Now this is simple. Suppose I am adding one more item here like fashion, and it will able to update that. This is very simple of binding the data, accessing the data and binding. You saw that in JavaScript jQuery, I showed you how much work is there. We have to write an explicit iterator. We have to create a element. You have to append the element to the child. We have to bind the data to element first. That's all JavaScript does. This is very simple. That means data binding you can handle in this way. Not only this, for example, see now, I will put another heading. So, and I say select category. Category. Now tell me, you can tell now I want a drop down. In a drop down, if I want to display them, then what I have to do, I have to write an expression here. For in a drop down, we have to collect categories dot what map. We have to read every category. After reading every category, what it should return? It should return an option, right? It should return an option. And option have important. You learned in HTML, option have text, option have value, option have selected, option have disabled. 4 properties will be there for option. That is why you need to be very strong in HTML, because without knowing HTML, how you'll present? First, you should know what properties are there. That means, suppose if I write here category, what is it? Category, this is text. That is not value. That means text can be different, value can be different. If you want to value, then you have to use what? Value. Value is also category. Sometimes value can be different, text can be different. What you see is different, what you submit is different. Right? You can bind to the text and values. Now you can see here it is working fine. A simple drop down is generated for those items here, displaying that. Drop down, tables, anything, the same approach we have to follow. We will see complex data. This is just beginning. We are just learning basic, simple data, how to present. Later we will see complex presentation. Here, another very important is technically when you are doing this, now you have an error. One problem is there. That means you can use this. So that means iterators, this is example, right? I will give this example. In this example, we are generating ordered list and drop down. One important point in React iterations. In React iterations, every iterating item must have a unique key. Compulsory. Every iterating item must have a unique key. Because if you are repeating same element, then how do you know which element, which reference? That means you are writing one button and 10 times it will repeat. One button will repeat 10 times, then 10 buttons will be created. And you click on any button, same work will be done for all 10 buttons, because you haven't designed 10 buttons. You designed only one button and you duplicated it. Then what happens if you write a function? Then that function will be same for all 10 buttons, but it should be different. Then how to identify every iterating item? To identify every iterating item, it must have a key, unique key. So see here, you can observe our logic have problem. When I go here and see the console, in the console it says that in the console it says that you see unique key property must be there. It says that means each child list must have a unique key. It says that it must have a unique key. That means each child in list must have a unique key. And we are not mentioning it. So that is wrong. That means what we have to do, for every iterating item, here list item is iterating, you should have a key. Key should be unique. I will give the same category name. Understood? because same category name is unique, every item different category name. So same here also, option also should have a key. So here also I will give the category name, so then it will be used as the key. Now there is no issue. You must configure a unique key for every iterating element. So that is very important, right? When you are dealing with the JSX presentation, this is very important. This is another example with the keys, how you configure, right? This is a very simple point about data binding. But now in the data binding, so many are there. Nested binding, nested iterations, presenting tables, presenting cards, presenting data coming from APIs. So much complex work is there that we'll see in next session. Tomorrow we will continue this. Okay. Today we just learned simple data binding, how it works, right? How do we access the data and how do we bind the data? In tomorrow's session, we will continue this. We will learn more about data binding and more real world presentations, how they happen. Okay. Tomorrow we'll see. And from tomorrow onwards, our classroom link will change. Not today, tomorrow onwards. Tomorrow in the classroom, I will give you the new classroom link for notes. All previous topics and current topics, everything will be in that notes. Okay. Tomorrow that demo link will end. So from tomorrow onwards, I will share a new link to you. Okay. Right.